Hurricanes, hailstorms, tornadoes, and wildfires. These are just some of the weather hazards that displace families and disrupt lives. Many of us are familiar with the scenes of devastation these hazards cause, and the recovery process for affected communities can take months, even years. In the most extreme circumstances, some may never be whole again. This may prompt many of you to ask what's being done to reduce the risks associated with these hazards. To answer this question, the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety presents the Disaster Discussions podcast. Join me, your host, Rachel Penton-Goche, as I sit down with professionals in the insurance, science, construction, and resiliency industries who help us explore the intersection of these hazards with the built environment. We'll bring you in-depth conversations with experts from across the country and highlight how science is engineering real-world solutions from home and business owners to create safer, more resilient communities. Join us for these discussions every month, and to make sure you don't miss an episode, go subscribe to the Disaster Discussions podcast on your favorite podcast app. We also invite you to engage with us on social media to ask your questions, share your thoughts, and to learn more about the IBHS mission. Welcome to the Disaster Discussions podcast, where we explore the intersection of weather and the built environment. I'm your host, Rachel Penton-Goche. And recently, IBHS partnered with the Insurance Information Institute, better known as III, as well as the U.S. Small Business Administration to host a LinkedIn audio event, Weathering the Storms, Strategies for Small Business Resilience. And for this month's podcast, we'll begin with an encore of that event. And with recent storms like Beryl, Francine, and Helene, we hope that small business owners can use the information discussed in that LinkedIn audio event to better prepare their businesses ahead of future storms, quickly resume operations after, and recover from any damage experienced so that they can get back to business. Later on in the episode, we'll catch up with Chuck Mikolas, Managing Director of IBHS Commercial Lines, to continue the conversation. For now, here's a replay of that event. So I want to welcome our fantastic panel today. First up, Fred Malik, nationally recognized as Fortified Fred, a resilient construction expert with more than 30 years of experience as a building industry professional, working in residential and commercial construction since 1994. And for the last 15 years, Fred has served as the managing director of the Fortified Building Program at IBHS. Fred works with homeowners, developers, residential and commercial building contractors, property insurers, and policymakers to improve the performance of existing and new building stock across the United States. Also joining us today, Francisco Sanchez Jr., the Associate Administrator for the U.S. Small Business Administration's Office of Disaster Recovery and Resilience. In his role with SBA, Francisco is responsible for elevating the priority of business and economic recovery by revamping the agency's disaster enterprise to better support America's 33 million small businesses, renters, and homeowners, providing them with the necessary resources to weather any storm and emerge stronger than ever. He has extensive experience in emergency management, recovery, and strategic planning. And Loretta Werters is the Vice President of Media Relations for the Insurance Information Institute, better known as III, focusing her work on improving understanding of key insurance issues across all industry stakeholders, including media, consumers, insurers, producers, and regulators. As a national spokesperson for the property and casualty insurance industry, Ms. Werters is frequently quoted in leading publications, including the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and Forbes, among others, and appears regularly on television networks, including ABC, CBS, NBC, CNBC, CNN, and Fox. All right, so we'll jump right into our discussion today, and we'll start off with talking about hurricane season. We recently hit the climatological peak of hurricane season, and Francine made landfall earlier this season. But as we know, that season is not over just yet. As I mentioned earlier, Florida is in the path of Helene and is likely to wreak havoc on communities there. And in fact, about 80% of all tropical activity in a given season occurs between August and October. So this question goes out to all of our panelists today. What should business owners know to ensure they're prepared moving forward toward the end of the season? And Francisco, I'll let you start out with this one.
Thanks so much for the question. As you mentioned, we're at the peak of hurricane season, but it just takes one storm to cause catastrophic damage to a community or to threaten your business. And so be prepared today. So if you haven't had preparedness, any activities yet in Florida, particularly in Florida right now, this is a good reminder to get those out of the way sooner rather than later, preferably today.
Fred, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think that Francisco made some good points there, and you know, understanding that we've had some pretty significant storms that have made landfall in the last 5 or 6 years between September and October. Hurricanes like Ian, Zeta, Delta, Sally, Dorian, Michael, and Sandy, just to name a few. You can bet that there's a lot of risk facing small business owners. A couple of things that they should keep thinking about right now is that the climate as it is favors rapid intensification. And so you need to really take a posture that you want to be prepared, and not just you and your business, but also encourage your employees to take steps so that they're prepared and your workforce remains stable. I guess the last thing is, don't wait. You can do things to make your business stronger and safer. Take action like going to IBHS.org and looking at our Hurricane Ready commercial guide.
All right, Loretta, do you have anything to add to that?
I think what Fred and Francisco said was perfect. I mean, every hurricane is different. It's not if a hurricane will happen, it's when, and that's why it's so important for business owners to be prepared. The Atlantic season is from June 1st to November 30th, and we're finding actually that more and more of this activity is happening later in the year. So while there's no way to lower the risk of a natural disaster, there are critical measures that can be taken to protect your company's bottom line, and a disaster plan and adequate insurance are keys to recovery.
Right, we had that activity right out of the bat this season, quite a lull through August, but now that activity certainly has picked up and the season is now in full swing. So my next question is for Fred, and I'd like to know, what are the most common vulnerabilities for small businesses when it comes to storm preparedness?
Yeah, particularly when we look at small business structures, so the buildings that small businesses occupy, the two primary vulnerabilities are typically going to be the roof and openings like roll-up garage doors or even personnel doors. The roof is the first line of defense. It is out there weathering every single day, and it is primarily responsible for keeping wind and water from entering the building and damaging inventory and disrupting operations. So really making sure that you are taking care of your roof to prevent that cascaded damage is important. Garage doors, as well as other openings, can be really susceptible to high winds, particularly in places that may not be anticipating the most severe winds from hurricanes. So like inland locations that are close to where a storm makes landfall. High winds can push the garage doors in, debris can fly around and puncture those openings. And because the majority of buildings are typically designed to be fully enclosed, which means keeping the wind and the pressure on the outside of the building, any large breaches can lead to air rushing in and pushing out on the walls and up on the roof, which can lead to catastrophic structural failures that can knock businesses offline for a considerable amount of time.
And my next question is for Francisco. How can small business owners identify their specific risks and vulnerabilities?
Yes, great question. I think in most communities, I have yet to find a single community where there's not more than one risk. Any from storms to ice storms to flooding to tornadoes to wildfires. And so I would, if you're a business owner or a homeowner, go to your local office of emergency management and see what the primary risks that you're facing are, so you can plan around those. And there's also some great resources, some with the partners online. We've got NOAA, the National Weather Service, that has a tool where you can go and see what natural hazards you might be impacted with in your community, and start with those. Each of those are unique. They have different preparedness measures, but for your specific community, go to those local resources, go to NOAA, see what you're susceptible to, and start planning around those primary disasters. And if you're prepared for those, chances are you'll be prepared for almost any disaster that you might encounter.
All right, thank you, Francisco. My next question is, what are the mitigation strategies small business owners can implement to protect their properties from severe weather? And I'd like to hear from both Loretta and Fred on this one.
Well, you want me to take it first? Yeah, I think the key, as we've all been saying, is identifying the specific risks your business face in determining the appropriate coverage needed. As Fred and Francisco have pointed out, we want to have contingency planning, develop a plan of action to respond to any unforeseen events such as a hurricane or a wildfire. Each one is different, so we need to make sure that those are handled properly. Diversify your supply chains to protect against risks, and then of course secure comprehensive insurance coverage.
Fred?
Yep. So I think, those are great tips there from Loretta. I think, making sure that you have a plan and making sure that you have properly resourced recovery resources, that's awesome. There are steps you can take to fortify your building so that it can provide of additional protection for your business. So a couple things to think about. As I mentioned before, we have a free hurricane ready guide for commercial structures that's available at IBHS.org. But if you're going to take some of the steps that we encourage in there, first thing to do is get somebody out to take a look at your roof. Whether you have a steep slope roof or a low slope roof, you want somebody to go up and take a look at it. Make sure that you don't see any gaps or missing pieces, any significant deterioration on low slope roofs. You don't want water ponding or pooling. Work with your landlord if you happen to be a tenant leasing space to get those inspections completed and address any issues that might be found. If your building has gutters, downspouts, or drains, like drains in a parapet wall, for example, make sure that those are free of debris so that the water can move where it needs to move. Sealing up gaps around wall penetrations, windows, and doors also is a great way to keep water from getting in and causing a cascade of damage that might impact your inventory. Talking to your landlord or if you own your property to make sure that tree limbs and debris are picked up and removed. And finally, if you have a generator, make sure that that's been serviced and that it's going to work properly should you lose power.
Thank you, Fred. All great tips there. And moving on to some discussion about building codes, I'd like to know, how do current building codes compare to resilient standards such as Fortified? And what are some of the benefits of exceeding those basic code requirements? And I'd like to hear from everyone on this question. Fred, you can start us off.
Sure. So, I think that most people are aware anyway that there is something called the building code, and that the building code is designed to do a couple of things. And primarily, the building codes are designed to preserve life safety. They're not necessarily designed to preserve the utilization of the building. Most people trust that their codes are sufficient to withstand the natural disasters they might face, but that's not always the case. We have about 35% of the American population lives in communities where 35% that have adopted modern building codes. That leaves the rest of the population at considerable vulnerability and risk to potential damage. Modern building codes do work as long as they are properly enforced. One of the things that a program like we offer, called Fortified Commercial in particular, we have used the latest science to understand where there are shortfalls in the current code and layer on top some additional resilient features that help to preserve the usability and the recovery of commercial buildings. And we also, as a part of that program, have a uniform standard for verification, which takes a lot of the inconsistency out that you might have if you're in a location that doesn't have well enforced building codes.
Francisco, anything to add on building codes?
Yes, certainly. As local codes are tailored to whatever your community might face, one of the things to keep in mind is, aside from SBA's disaster programs, is we have lending programs for your business to be able to grow your business, buy real estate, build new facilities. That those allow you to access those funds to build structures that meet local building codes. And in the unfortunate circumstance that you find yourselves having to come to the Small Business Administration post disaster for a disaster loan because you were impacted, now you can add 20% on top of your verified damage to build back in a way that's stronger and more mitigated, whether you choose to do that proactively or if you are complying with building codes. There are ways to finance that through the Small Business Administration. So ask people to explore those options so they can be more resilient in the face of disasters to come.
Thank you. Loretta, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, building codes can impact insurance too in a number of ways, including insurance premiums. Building codes can help reduce insurance premiums for communities and commercial property owners. Buildings that meet or exceed the safety standards may be eligible for lower premiums, so business owners should take a look at that. From a claims process perspective, insurance companies often require that repairs and replacements meet specific building code requirements, so failure to comply with these codes can result in either denied claims or limited coverage, so it's important for businesses to be aware of that. And from a coverage perspective, insurance companies may offer more coverage to buildings that meet updated building codes. This is because updated codes make buildings more resilient to severe weather, so that can reduce the risk of unexpected events. And then there's coverage loss. Insurance companies may deem coverage too risky and stop insuring buildings that are built using the older energy codes. And then finally, a building code upgrade coverage is something to think about as a business owner. It's also known as law or ordinance coverage and can be added to an insurance policy. And that will help you if you do have a loss that when you rebuild, you can build to code or above. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Loretta. And I want to turn more to more about insurance now. And my next question is also for you as well, Loretta. How can investing in storm resilience impact insurance premiums for small businesses?
Thanks. Well, investing in resilience and preparedness won't prevent these losses, but they can significantly reduce them. For every dollar spent on climate resilience and preparedness, communities can save $13 in damages, cleanup costs, and economic impact. And that's something that's according to a new economic study by Allstate and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the Commerce Foundation. As a small and medium-sized business owner, running a business in our current inflationary economy is not easy. Prices are increasing. Unfortunately, with the current insurance hard market, premiums are also increasing, which, especially negatively impacts smaller businesses. So adding to these challenges is the recent surge in inflation. This has led to a significant increase in the cost of materials and labor, and that directly impacts building replacement costs. So to help mitigate costs, it's important to regularly schedule maintenance, which is crucial to lowering business insurance costs. For example, a compromised roof, as we were talking about earlier, can lead to water damage, structural issues. So you want to regularly inspect that, make sure to look for any missing or damaged shingles or gutter blockages, any signs of a leak. And make sure to also document any repairs or upgrades you've made so your broker or insurance professional can factor this proactive behavior into your premium calculations going forward. In fact, we have a new roof kit coming out today that looks at what you can do to prevent those losses.
Thank you, Loretta. And expanding on that a bit more, another question for you. I'd like to know what kind of insurance policy should small business owners consider for covering storm-related damages?
Good question. Once you've established what your risks are, you'll know what kind of coverages you will need. Certainly, property insurance can help protect the property your business owns or leases or rents. So that includes things like the buildings, the equipment, the inventory, your furniture and fixtures. It also provides coverage for loss of accounts receivable and valuable papers and records. And then one that's very important that some businesses don't think about, but it's called business interruption insurance, also known as business income insurance. It's often included in a business owner's policy, sometimes known as a BOP, or as a standalone or rider to a commercial package policy. The perils covered typically include theft, vandalism, fire, wind, hail, lightning, damage from vehicles or even aircraft. So it can also include mechanical breakdown. Keep in mind a BOP is very limited in scope, so you want to check with your insurance professional to ensure you have adequate coverage. Some BOPs are tailored to the individual business and their needs. Business interruption insurance can also include what's called extra expense, which will cover anything beyond the normal day-to-day operating expenses that are necessary to keep your business solvent. And, these are important things. Extra expense covers things like renting a temporary place of business while your business is being restored, replacement of technology, furniture, paying your employees overtime or hiring more employees, leasing equipment. That can be a real problem if you're not in your regular building. It can also be bundled in a BOP, the extra expense, as a separate insurance policy or as a rider to a commercial policy. And then another thing to consider, what a lot of businesses don't, is what's called a utility services endorsement, which extends the business interruption and extra expense coverage. And that applies to a suspension of the operations caused by a disruption of the basic utility services. So if a business loses electricity or gas or water, that coverage will help protect you so that you can be up and running. And there's two types of endorsements you can think about. One is called time element. So in the event wind breaks down a power line or a water main is broken, this coverage can cover those losses, including loss of income and expenses. And then you have direct damage, and this is an extension of property insurance, and it provides protection against damage to a business owner's property resulting from an interruption of any of those utility services I mentioned. And lastly, the one thing I really want to point out that's important, because we'll be seeing a lot of this after Hurricane Helene. We've been told that flooding is going to be a big issue. So flood insurance is not covered under a standard business owner's policy. So you want to make sure to purchase flood insurance both for the structure, if you own the building, as well as the contents. Flood insurance can be purchased through the federal government's National Flood Insurance Program, as well as through some private insurance companies. Now, the NFIP has limits, $500,000 on the structure and $500,000 on the content. So you may need to seek private insurance as a second layer of protection. Do keep in mind, there is a 30-day waiting period before being able to purchase flood insurance. So with Helene coming down the pike, that might be hard to get that. But going forward, business owners should really think about doing that.
All right, thank you. And I want to turn to after the event now, after the storm. I'd like to know, what steps should small business owners take to ensure that they make a quick recovery and continuity of operations after the severe weather event has ended? And I'd like to hear from Francisco and Fred on this one.
Yes, great question. What we found is 25% of businesses have a difficult time or cannot recover at all, particularly small businesses after a disaster. And we see that more and more across the country. So after the disaster, certainly you should be looking at ways to access the capital quickly as you can to begin the recovery, to really condense that window. And so certainly SBA's disaster lending programs are here to do that. To give you a little bit of insight what that means, it's 4% over 30 years to help businesses not only with the physical damage, but also economic injury. Oftentimes, Maui is an excellent example. There were businesses, obviously, that were physically impacted, but you see a reduction in spending, a reduction in economic growth, and so you may be a business that has reduced revenue. So we can help those businesses as well. For physical damage, we talked about being able to give you the capital to rebuild, but also build back in a way that's more resilient. If you're a business that is not physically damaged, but seeing a reduction in revenues, we can help you with that, with economic injury disaster lending. So that helps you to get the capital you need to continue to pay your employees, to continue to pay your bills, and all of those essential things. And so I know the last thing people often want to think about is a loan, but we had a study that was recently done by the Wharton School that said businesses, and they did research for more than 10 years, businesses that availed themselves of low interest long-term loans not only had a quicker path to recovery, but they saw more employment, they saw their business grow, they saw themselves taking on additional capital, but in a good way, not for more debt, but buying new equipment. And so really understand the importance of getting your business back on its feet and getting the capital that you need to get that process going as quickly as you can.
Fred, would you like to respond to that one?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to keep in mind that if you have a plan, that there's a few steps that you're going to take in the near term, immediately post recovery. That includes things like starting to work to get the building to dry out. If it's a commercial structure, making sure that you're plugging leaks, getting fans, getting power back established as soon as you can, get the building dried out, and address any potential damage that there might be. Contact your insurance agent and get them to make sure that they're acting promptly. Take pictures of the damage that you might have so that you have a visual record. Those are some of the near-term things that you might want to do, and those are pretty obvious for folks. On a longer-term outlook, you can really take steps to prevent this kind of thing from happening in the first place, or dramatically reduce the potential that it could happen to you in the future. And that's by following a program like Fortified Commercial or Fortified Multifamily. We touched a little bit on those earlier. And Fortified, does build on the building code to enhance certain features and systems in the house that are in the commercial, in the building or the multifamily structure, that are really prone to damage, like the roof and the openings that we talked about. So we have 3 levels. We have roof, silver, and gold. You work with an evaluator who helps to act as a consultant and a documenter as your project is repaired or rebuilt. And by following the steps that we include in Fortified, you can actually dramatically reduce the potential severity of a future claim, or even eliminate or dramatically reduce the possibility that you'll even have a claim the next time. And those kinds of proactive activities can really make the difference about whether or not your business is sustainable and survives in the long term, or whether you're one of those businesses that unfortunately succumbs to the post-disaster consequences.
All right, thank you, Fred. And our final question today, I'd like to ask each of you, if a small business owner could only implement one resilience measure, what would you recommend and why? And Francisco, I'll let you kick us off with this one.
Yeah, so great question. So one, I would say just start and get started. Resilience can be, and mitigation can be something, as I hear businesses across this country just they want to tackle it. They're working on their business. It's a priority, but they see it's a complex thing. The biggest thing is you get started and do that with 3 things. Build a team. You as your business owner or your employees, create a team that everybody has some sense of how your business operates and what the potential points of failure are, so you can tackle that. And second, you ought to have that buy-in from your executive leadership, and you ought to be championing as the business owner or as the CEO, COO, just really giving the people the time they need to focus on that. And keep it simple. A lot of elements to talk, but those are the things to do. And again, I just stress to businesses, simply get the process started and take that first step.
Loretta.
Yeah, all good points. A resilient business is one that prepares for, responds to, and adapts to disruptions to maintain continuous operations. It involves managing risk, and small businesses don't have risk managers. So if you're a small business, you have to be your own risk manager. And that means making sure to respond effectively to unexpected events that could negatively impact your operations, such as natural disasters. So I'd say the one measure is to look at what your risks are and read your insurance policy to make sure those risks are covered. If you're not sure if you have the right type and amount of insurance, check with your insurance professional to make sure you close those gaps.
And Fred.
Yeah, so I get to round it out. So I just want to be a part of the choir that's saying take action. Don't wait. Don't be lulled into a false sense of security that it's not going to happen this year or it's not going to happen here. As we started off this event, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. So taking action is important, even small actions. That's a great way to make sure that you're not in a situation where you have to rush and under pressure make really important decisions because you've been making progress along the way. But if it were me and I had a business that I needed to protect, The one thing that I would do right off the bat is I would reach out to a roofer and have my roof inspected. I would make sure that I understand exactly the condition of my roof and any repairs or mitigation steps that can be taken to make sure that that roof is going to be able to keep the wind and water out of the building. That applies whether you're an inline retail store and you have to work with a landlord. If you're a multi-family business owner or developer, property manager, all of those can benefit from making sure that the roofs are in good shape. And if they're not, there's a plan put in place to address that.
Thank you, Fred. And as we conclude today's event, I'd like to give each of you an opportunity to share your organization's resources with our listeners today. So, Loretta, how can people find out more about III?
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, I think the best thing, Rachel, is for people to go to our website. It's www.iii.org. And we have a large amount of resources, particularly, for consumers on the business side and the personal side. We also have a lot of information on roofs as well. So please feel free to take a look. And if anybody has any questions, they can always direct message me on LinkedIn.
And Francisco, how can people find out more about SBA?
Yes, so actually we have one of the most friendly government websites with the name. It's just sba.gov, and you can go there to learn not just about disasters, but all the programs we have, from capital for businesses to contracting opportunities to the counseling that we have, and obviously the disaster space before, during, and after. If you haven't visited, please come in to see how we can help you not only survive business after disaster, but how we can grow your business in non-disaster times as well.
And Fred, how can folks learn more about Fortified and IBHS?
Yeah, so accessing some of the great resources we have, just go to IBHS.org. We have the Hurricane Ready Guide there for commercial and multifamily buildings. You'll also find links there to go to the free resources we have for our Fortified commercial and Fortified multifamily programs. There you'll find free checklists and a very comprehensive workflow chart that tells you just how to go about starting an application and connecting with all the right teammates to help you execute on your making your building stronger, safer, and more durable in the future.
All right, Fred, Loretta, Francisco, thank you for all the great information today. And thank you to everyone listening for joining us for Weathering the Storm Strategies for Small Business Resilience. And we hope that all the small business owners listening today are leaving this event better informed and prepared for severe weather. Thanks for joining us. That was Weathering the Storms Strategies for Small Business Resilience. And joining us in the studio today for a deeper dive into all things commercial, this month's podcast guest, Chuck Mikolas, Managing Director of Commercial Lines. So welcome to Disaster Discussions.
Thank you, Rachel. We're
glad to have you here in person. So I want to start out talking more about the Commercial Lines team. So tell me about the IBHS Commercial Lines team. What all does that encompass, and what is the goal of your team?
Yeah, sure. So our goal is to provide resources to our commercial-focused members on how to reduce their losses, what's most meaningful to them. So we provide online tools, we provide field tools, we provide their policyholder information as well to help them understand what their hazards may be, what their vulnerabilities may be to those hazards, and how can we reduce those losses.
Yeah, so we're here for homeowners, of course, but we're also here for small business owners, commercial building owners, things like that. So I want to hear a little bit about your background. I'd like to find out how everyone made their way to IBHS. So tell me a little bit about your career background and how you ended up here.
Yeah, well, I've had a little bit of a winding road to get here, but so I started out in the commercial property insurance field doing commercial property appraisals.
Okay.
I started a company called FM Global. And so what I did was I went out and I would look at very large type of occupancies, and it could be anything from semiconductor plants to casinos to printing plants, food processing, and determine what the replacement cost would be, as well as what the business interruption cost could be if they had some losses. So it really gave me an opportunity to learn about construction. I have an engineering degree, but it's in electrical, so it really doesn't help in what I do here. So I cut my teeth working at FM Global. After several years, I transferred into the risk engineering department where I did loss control. So it was basically building by building combat to help them reduce losses for their policyholders. So go to a facility, look at the facility for internal fire as well as natural hazards. So wind, flood, and look at what the building vulnerabilities were, basically doing a risk assessment. And then again, how can we reduce those losses? How can we prevent that loss? What's the recommendation to improve that property? And then what's the cost to that? And then loss expectancy that would be associated with each type of scenario. So I did that for several years. And then I had the opportunity to work with a company called XL Gaps. I went there and I started up their wind team, and I helped them establish, how can they reduce their losses, again, doing risk assessments for individual buildings. And then I was fortunate enough to meet the president of IBHS in 2010, chance meeting. Met Julie Rochman in an airport in Newark, New Jersey, which was kind of ironic. And then I came here, and I've been here ever since, and just loving it.
So were you aware of IBHS at that time, or is that how you first found out about it?
I did hear about
Okay.
IBHS. I had a couple conversations previous to my meeting with Julie. But it all came together when I met her.
Yeah, I can see how that naturally led to IBHS. So you've looked at a lot of commercial buildings, I take it.
Yes, exactly, yes.
All right, so in the first half of this podcast, we of course heard that LinkedIn audio event replay, and so we heard a lot about how business owners can prepare for tropical systems, but what are some of the other perils that commercial buildings face?
Yeah, so we're seeing a lot of perils out there now, right? So we've got hurricanes, we have high winds, severe convective storms, of course. There's tornadoes. We also look at hail. We look at wind-driven rain and water intrusion into a building. We look at winter weather, and of course we look at wildfire as well.
Yeah, so it really runs the gamut. And This is a subject I feel like a lot of us have just been hearing about in the news recently because of course, Helene. We've heard about all those business owners, especially up in the mountains of the Carolinas, that have been either lost their business completely or just kind of having to rebuild. So it's definitely, I think, something, it's at the top of my mind and probably a lot of folks' minds right now. So we're going to talk a little bit about each of those perils today and the vulnerabilities that businesses face and how we can prepare for these. And we know that preparing for these can be the difference between business as usual versus shutting down. So I want to start with wind first. Of course, it's a big one here at IBHS. And there's a few big pieces of research we've done in the research center concerning commercial buildings. We put them in the chamber, we've turned the fans on. You've seen some of those powerful videos where we've intentionally caused damage to these buildings to find out how they're most vulnerable. So let's start with the roof. We say lead with the roof here at IBHS. We know that that's one of the most impactful ways you can prepare a business for severe wind. Lots of moving parts, though. We're familiar with the parts of a residential home. A lot of us are, but for those who are not familiar with commercial buildings, we have roof-mounted equipment, roof drainage systems, single-ply membranes, metal edge flashing. So definitely some more unique things. So let's start with metal edge flashing as it applies to commercial roofs. So one strip of metal accounts for the majority of all roof cover failures from wind. We've done some research on that. Tell me about that. What does that mean?
Yeah, so as we say, the roof is your first line of defense against wind, but the metal edge flashing is the first line of defense for the first line of defense, right? So if you lose the metal edge flashing, and that is the piece of metal that basically encapsulates the roof cover and connects it to the wall, if that comes loose and tears apart, then you can have a cascading event of failures. So we really want to make sure that we keep that flashing on tight. And we've done a series of research on metal edge flashing. We've also done demonstrations where we've had side-by-side buildings that encompasses the metal edge flashing, single-ply membrane, roof-mounted equipment, the walls, the windows, the doors, and how those buildings perform. And I do encourage the audience to take a look at that video if you haven't seen it already. But the metal edge flashing is really the key to preventing those losses. And what we saw in Hurricane Ian was that nearly 3/4 of all the losses to low slope roof covers, metal edge flashing was a part of that failure. So the question comes, well, why are we seeing these failures? Because this has been something that has been affected our building stock for many years. So there's a couple of ways to help reduce those damages. And it got introduced into the building code in 2009, but we're still seeing those losses. So how do we stop that from happening, right? So one of the things is, we're big proponents of a physical inspection of it as well. There are codes. There's a ANSI SPRY ES1, which we have looked at in our research as well. But if that is not properly installed and not inspected, there's a chance that it's going to fail. And if that fails, then you could lose partial, if not all, of your roof cover system.
And that video that you mentioned that we tested, the good building is still here, right?
Yes, the good building is here, and we did that a number of years ago. Actually, it was in 2012. So it's been weathering out here for a long time. And what we've done also is we put together a flashing toolkit to help our members and their policyholders evaluate the flashing. And we understand that you can't always pull on the metal edge flashing. If you're to do so, you have to use personal protective equipment, take all the safety precautions necessary. But if you can't do that, there are some lesser alternatives to doing inspections. You can use drones. You can inspect from the ground if it's a single story. And we've put that all into an easy-to-use document where it kind of gives you the pros and cons of each type of inspection that you could do.
Okay, so the roof flashing toolkit at ibhs.org.
Yes.
Okay. I want to talk about single-ply membranes. I'm personally not super familiar with commercial buildings. I don't even know what that means. So,
Okay.
And not everyone listening to the podcast knows what that means today. So what is a single-ply membrane, and why are they important, and what have we learned here at the Research Center?
So yes, another important roof cover system that we've been researching here at IBHS, and was also part of one of those early tests and demonstrations that I mentioned. Single-ply membranes is a roof cover system that has become very popular. It's very economical to install. It can be installed in all parts of the country, and really, basically, what it is kind of what it describes. It is just a membrane. There is a membrane that's usually installed over a cover board or over insulation over the deck. It's a low slope, so a flat roof. There are three main types of single-ply membranes. There's a TPO, there's a PVC, and there's an EPDM. And those are acronyms for some chemical compositions. So the TPO is probably the most common out of them all, and you can find it in all types of occupancies. They all have their own little intricacies, like a PVC is really good for industrial type of settings. EPDM has a rubber base into it too, so it's really good against hail. All of these can be hail resistant products as well. And then there's a certain way to attach them. They're either mechanically attached or fully adhered, where they kind of glue the whole thing down to the roof cover.
Okay, interesting. So a roof cover option essentially for a commercial building.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so I want to talk about large commercial doors. And we talk about this with residential homes often. We know that the garage is one of the largest openings in the home, makes it really vulnerable to wind. Yes. But we have the same physics at play here with large commercial doors, doors like you would maybe see in a warehouse. So talk about the importance of keeping those protected during high winds.
Yes, so commercial doors are another area of a very vulnerable aspect of a building. So it's got a large surface area, and if it breaks, you're going to land in a lot of wind, and it's going to increase the pressure pushing up on the roof. Another one of those damage amplifiers. So there's three major types of large commercial doors. Sectional doors, which are very similar. It's the same thing as a garage door in a home. There's an overhead door, which looks like the sectional door, but it just travels all the way up the side of the wall, another popular one for warehouses. And then there's roll-up doors, where it actually kind of rolls up, and it's kind of metal slats and rolls right up. On all of these instances, what you want to do is you want to make sure that the track is very strong. So if you could twist that track, that's not a good sign. You want to make sure you have long rollers, the roller stems, because those can pop out of the track as well. The sectional and the overhead door, you can have vertical struts and you can have horizontal struts, vertical and horizontal struts that can help reinforce that door. On a roll-up door, it's a different type of animal, so you would have wind locks, which kind of helps engage that track. All of these can have, you want to look for labels, you want to have it properly designed for the wind pressure for the area, and if you're in a hurricane-prone region or a tornado-prone region, you really should go with an impact-rated commercial door. You want to keep those doors in place.
Okay, so yeah, much like residential homes, some of the same precautions or mitigation measures with commercial buildings, but I take it they're a lot bigger and.
Yes, yeah, and they you can have, like a warehouse, you can have many of them.
Right.
And you really, once it starts breaking, it's a domino effect for the building, and it can push up the roof, including the deck too. So it's a really key aspect to keep in place, and it's not that expensive. A lot of the things that we're talking about and we'll talk about are cost-effective solutions for mitigation.
All right, and the reason why I wanted to talk about these different parts, the metal edge flashing, the single-ply membranes, the commercial doors, is because those are just a few of the things that we address in our Fortified Commercial program. For those who are not familiar with our Fortified Home program, that's a voluntary above-code standard for re-roofing for your own home, but we have the same program for our Fortified for commercial programs as well. So I want to talk a little bit about this. How many, just roughly, Fortified commercial and multi-family buildings do we have, and kind of how is your team helping all this grow?
Yeah, so we have approximately 30 or so Fortified Commercial designated buildings. We have about a little over 40 that are seeking applications now. Our Fortified Multifamily program has really been taking off. That's our newest program in the Fortified suite of programs, and we have, I'm going to have to look at my notes on this one. We have about little over 150 designated buildings, which includes almost 1,500 individual units. So when I say individual units, that's families being protected. And we have a little over 500 buildings seeking designation right now, which includes a little over 7,500 families. So we're talking over, close to 9,000 families being protected through this program.
Yeah, and our subject today, of course, is commercial and small business, but you guys take care of multifamily as well on the Commercial Lines team?
Yes, so our commercial team, we not only provide the commercial resources for our members, but we also handle the day-to-day operations of the Fortified Commercial and Fortified Multifamily program. We work closely with Fred Malik, who heads up our Fortified programs overall, and we look to make sure that we complement all the different programs, because we have seen that local communities and economies, if they build to the Fortified Home program and the commercial multifamily, you're going to have people who are living in safe homes. You're going to have built businesses that are going to stay in production. The economy is going to thrive, and we do loss investigations after storms come through, and we have seen communities just decimated and economies decimated, and they don't come back. So building to a resilient standard like Fortified really helps ensure not the individuals, but the entire community survive.
Yeah, definitely all works together as a system and as a community. So I want to hear about some of the success stories of Fortified Commercial. What are some of the types of businesses that are getting these Fortified Commercial designations? And then what are some kind of success stories of some of those places that maybe have already been designated?
So we had a really eye-opening experience during Hurricane Sally. We had just completed our, it's the Lodge at Gulf State Park, and this is in Gulf Shores, Alabama. It includes 3 hotel towers. It includes conference rooms and restaurants, and it's right on the beach. And Hurricane Sally bared right down on it. And, we're watching this, and I live in Tampa, Florida, and my colleague Chris Traffy does as well. And we were watching it, and we saw on the Weather Channel, they were broadcasting from this location. So we're like, ooh, okay, we're going to be right in the eye of the storm. So when Weather Channel broadcasts there, there's probably going to be some action. So sure enough, Hurricane Sally made a direct beeline, went right over this location, and the facilities manager was interviewed by the Weather Channel, and he used a phrase that has resonated for ever since, and that was that facility served as a beacon of hope for the community. During the storm, they stayed open. They continued to serve the food in the restaurants.
Oh, wow.
They actually housed the staff in the local area during and after the storm because they did not have a place to live. So they came and stayed there. They didn't miss a beat. They had minimal damage. They kept operating. And it was just a really great success story that just kind of came right out the gate. So it was really, really rewarding for, I think, the entire IBHS staff to see our contribution, for others. And I mean, that's our mission. We're here to reduce suffering from these types of losses, and it really came through.
Yeah, that's an awesome story. I think it speaks volumes that they had the confidence to stay in place during the storm.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, awesome. I love to hear those stories of success. And imagine if all the buildings in Gulf Shores, Alabama, were built to the fortified standard, it would be back to business.
Yes. And there's a lot of activity going on along the Gulf state, along the Gulf in Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama. So everyone is really embracing this. And, there's nothing better than coming through a storm and the proof is in the pudding. So there was another example, multifamily building. It was under construction during Hurricane Ida. Again, minimal damage, and just nearby there was catastrophic damage, just a half mile away. Entire walls gone, apartment buildings. So it was really a very profound side-by-side example of what can be done.
Yeah, we see those examples in the chamber where there are videos that we make, but when you see it in real life, it really pushes the point home. So switching gears now a bit, just want to talk about hail, and that could be a source of damage for commercial buildings located in hail-prone areas. So how can a business better protect a building against hail?
So yeah, hail has been a major loss driver for many years. There are hail-resistant products out there. I'm going to touch on one thing when it comes to hail, and I'm going to come back to the single-ply membrane. One of the things about single-ply membranes is that a lot of times the way it's installed is the metal plates and fasteners are just below the cover. So if a hailstone comes and either hits a seam and hits a plate, there's a good chance it's going to tear the cover. So, and then that can lead to water damage and water leaks. So what we recommend is the single-ply membrane can be fully adhered or glued to a cover board, a hard cover board, which could be glued to mechanically attached insulation below. So what this does is it conceals all the fasteners. And I mention this because, again, single-ply membranes are a very popular type of roof cover system now. Built-up roofs can perform very well. We recommend embedded gravel in a built-up roof because if it's loosely laid, it can blow away and then impact other buildings. And the same thing with a ballasted roof. A ballasted roof is when we have large stones that literally hold down the cover. It does well against hail, but we have seen in our own test chamber that those winds, the pressure pushes the membrane up, which can scour the rocks, and they can also become windborne debris. So we really don't want to be impacting nearby buildings.
Right.
So that's the big things when it comes to covers. The other things too, you have your roof-mounted equipment. So you want to make sure that there's nettings, there's different kind of fabrics, there's panels that can be installed to protect the fins of a condenser that's on the roof, or the inlets and the outlets of the ventilation. So there are products out there that work, and really, really come in handy to reduce those losses.
You call those hail guards? Is
Hail
that
guards,
right?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, what about PV panels and skylights, things that could be on a commercial
Yes,
building?
those are very vulnerable to hail, as you know. You can get impact-rated skylights. So it's a little bit of a different test, but it will serve the same purpose. So, and then when it comes to the photovoltaic panels, you want to get something that is approved too. There are hail impact resistant ones on the market. Those things they're very vulnerable. I mean, they're out there. They're just
waiting for the hailstorm.
They have inherent, exactly,
Yeah.
vulnerabilities because they have to be out there and
Right.
and they're in this parts of the country.
Okay. All right. Well, great discussion there on hail. And this is the November episode of the podcast. So we've got to talk a little bit about winter weather. And
Of course.
I know we have a lot of guidance available on winter weather. So I want to talk about that for a minute. Tell me about things like snow loads, snow drifts. These are things that building owners have to contend with.
Yeah. And, for our member companies, too, I want to mention that we do have online training available for winter weather as well as for wind and hurricane, high winds, and then we also have one for winter weather. But when it comes to, wildfire, but when it comes to winter weather, snow loads, yes, is definitely a big concern. What we see is you can have a building that was designed for a specific snow load, and then they can build another building next to it, or they can install roof-mounted equipment. And what happens is you get these snow drifts, so the wind-blown snow is going to find a place to rest. It's going to pile up, and then it's going to put extra stress on a certain part of the building. That's where you get the collapse problem. That gets compounded when you have multiple snows. So you could have, let's say you have a powder snow, and then you have a wet snow, and then it freezes, and it turns to ice. So all of this starts to add up and becomes just extra weight on the roof. Anytime, if anybody's in a building, and it's especially wood construction, and this can happen for any construction, metal buildings, all metal buildings. If you ever notice any kind of signs or you hear any creaking or stuff, that's when you really got to get out.
Okay, what about ice dams? I grew up most of my life in the South, but I remember we had a winter storm in 2021, and no one in Louisiana had ever heard of an ice dam until we had heard of an ice dam.
Yeah,
So I know they can cause big problems.
Yes. So with ice dams, the first telltale sign if you have ice dams going on is when you get to see pretty icicles hanging down, say in front of a home or a small residential building or any kind of steep slope. I'm going to talk about the steep slope roofs, because they're the most vulnerable. So what happens is you have your gutters, you have your steep slope, and you'll get snow that comes down, and you can get a heating effect if you have not enough insulation. It may go up and heats the underside of it. It melts. It drips down towards the gutter. It refreezes. This happens a couple of times. Next thing you know, when it does melt again, it starts to back up into the underside, underneath the shingles, gets under the plywood, get into the attic space and cause a lot of damage. So what you really want to do is make sure that your ceilings are well insulated. You want to make sure that you never see those icicles. You want to make sure your gutters are clear, and you can install synthetic underlayments that stick right to the wood deck and prevent that water. If it's going to back up, it won't back into the building. It'll back up above this, below the shingle, but would still be able to get out of the building.
Right, so that extra layer can really be the big difference in protection.
Yes.
And so I just want to mention, obviously, winter weather, not one of our perils that we research here, but as you mentioned, we like to get people winter ready as we head into the cooler months. And I also wanted to put this in here because frozen pipes, I know this is a huge source of losses, or can be. So talk about that as a damage source, and what are some mitigation strategies for business owners when it comes to protecting against pipes. And again, a lot of places in cold climates I know are used to preparing for this, but some of those places where we're seeing those more extreme cold snaps like Texas and Louisiana and some of those places in warmer climates might need a little extra guidance on that.
Yes, and I was actually in Texas when they had the big freeze a few years ago, and I saw a lot of damages and a couple of things. So let's touch on this, let's touch with small businesses first, residential style businesses. In the South, as you know, a lot of times your main incoming water line will be on the exterior part of the building. Well, that's the first spot where you're going to run into problems, because once that temperature drops, there's a potential to freeze there too. Once it comes inside the building, it could be in a wall that may not be properly insulated. It can be below cabinets, so if you've got sinks or water closets, you want to open up those areas to make sure that there's heat that gets into those areas. And a lot of people have heard you let the water drip a little bit, and that's true, because it relieves the pressure. So attic spaces too, another vulnerable area. If it's not heated, which it probably won't be, if there's any pipes up there, you run that problem. Tying that to larger commercial, same thing. Attic spaces, you may have fire protection systems in the attic. And if you start moving a little bit south, not built to northern climates, you really run that risk of them freezing as well. Another area we saw a lot of losses for large commercial buildings that may have say mid-rise or high-rises, the stairwells where the fire protection systems are. What happens is if the building is not properly pressurized and you have a penthouse door, you can get that cold air coming in, and then you have the sprinkler protection freezing, and then you have losses from that in the stairwells. So got to be careful. Small businesses, large businesses, in between, all have vulnerabilities, and you got to really be aware of the potential loss.
Yeah, and we know that not just losses of the buildings, but you can lose power as well in these events. And we saw that in the Texas ice storm back in 2021. How important is it to have a backup power source for your business?
Well, I would say it is critical. And I would say it's critical for all the perils that we've discussed, especially when, certainly winter weather. We just came out of Hurricane Milton and Helene in Florida, and I've been through several hurricanes in Florida, and I have seen small franchises really thrive when they have a generator, because no one else does. And I remember just trying to get a cup of coffee, and just recently I saw on social network a McDonald's, a Wawa, where they had generators, and the line was super long. So you not only can stay open, you can keep your employees paid, much less stress. Same thing with winter weather. If you lose power, you may lose heat. So you want to try to connect whatever heating apparatuses you may have to your backup power. I have a whole house generator for my house now in Florida, after I had messed with smaller generators that can operate refrigerators, things like that. So I'm a firm believer of that too. And again, coming back to the restaurants and your local economy, having those generators operating, ready to go, really makes a huge difference in the recovery for your business as well as the community.
Yeah, definitely. Just having a place in town to go get a hot meal at the end of a day of working to recover. That's another one of those beacons of light.
Yes, exactly.
For sure. Okay, well, turning it back to another one of our core perils now, I want to talk about wildfire, especially some of those states out west that are most vulnerable to wildfire, places like California, Colorado. What types of things do business owners in this territory have to think about when it comes to preparing for wildfire?
Sure, yeah, we're seeing a lot of wildfires all across the country now. So one of the things, what we do here at IBHS is we focus on holistic approaches. So we want to, look at systems and make sure we kind of cover all the bases. It's not just, one item here, one or there. So you want to really focus on several things. So what we do with wildfire is you really want to pay attention to the type of construction. So you want to have non-combustible construction. You also want to have defensible space. And what that does is that kind of creates a perimeter around the building to prevent embers from accumulating, direct flame, radiant heat. And then to help with that defensible space, you want to have a vegetative maintenance plan. So if you want to have, something that is scheduled, you have trimmings of trees, and you want to make sure that that defensible space is well maintained. Let me come back to the combustible construction. So combustible construction is roof. You want to have a Class A roof. That's the least combustible type of roof out there. You want to have non-combustible walls. You want to have double pane tempered windows. If you can't necessarily change your walls, you at least want to have a 6-inch vertical clearance of non-combustible material between the ground and the beginning of that, say if it's wood, so that if embers do accumulate there, they can't propagate up. You want to have vents that have a screen, like about a 1/8 inch screen to prevent embers from infiltrating the building. Defensible space, that 5-foot perimeter around the building. Nothing combustible, no shrubs, just put some nice rocks, and then as you work your way out, there's some more recommendations, requirements to help reduce, again, propagation of flames. You don't want things to be able to travel, no continuity of combustibles. And we address that in our Wildfire Ready program, and our guidance and our online training. And then, as you know, of course, we have our Wildfire Prepared Home program.
Yeah, and hopefully one day we'll see maybe a wildfire prepared commercial program that's maybe down the line. I'm not sure, but I kind of compare it to our fortified program. I know this is some of our fairly newer science, and so that is, of course, something that's ongoing research here. But yeah, all about preventing or protecting yourself against those embers and those flames. Yeah. All right. Well, I think we've covered all the perils now, so I just want to talk about a few other things. We've discussed some of the common vulnerabilities for commercial buildings today. These are things you can do to try and mitigate your risk to help your building stand up to whatever peril it is. But what are some of the other actions that business owners should take in order to prepare ahead of incoming storms? So you talk about, ways you can prepare your physical building and things, but what else do you need to kind of do in advance to get ready?
Sure. So you really want to have a couple of things. So the couple of things would be a business continuity plan. That's your overarching plan on how to deal with these types of catastrophes. How are you going to work with your suppliers? What are you going to do with your employees? How are you going to make sure that people get paid? All of those kinds of things go into a good business continuity plan. The sister part of that, or a subsection of that, would be your emergency response and recovery plan. So, what are you going to do to protect the building? Who's going to do it? What's the vulnerable aspects of that? We have easy to use toolkits for both of those types of things. We have Open for Business, and we have Open for Business Easy. And then we have our Easy Prep, which is the emergency preparedness side of it. Along with those, we also recommend that you have some kind of relationship, whether it's an agreement or just a conversation with two different segments of the community. One is roofers. If you have a conversation with roofers and they know your facility and you have damages, you're probably going to get help sooner than later if you run into a problem after a storm, which is a big deal. The other thing is there are disaster recovery type companies out there that you can have work out an agreement with them, come to see your facility first. They'll know some of your vulnerabilities. What happens if you get water that comes into the building? What happens if you lose this freezer? Can they get you, a freezer, something like that? Along those lines, while you're thinking through all of that, you may have competition that may actually become, your friend in a time of need. You can have a mutual agreement where you say, listen, if you lose your freezers, I will store your stuff, something like that. And that could be for any type of occupancy. the important thing is to think through this ahead of time. You're going to reduce the stress that you're going to encounter. You're going to help ensure your business thrives. There's a couple of statistics out there, right? About 25% of businesses don't come back after what is it? 40% don't come back. Sorry, and then they don't return to business, and then another percentage of that never comes back. So it's really worth having a plan. I have one little phrase. I'm going to say this. People say, well, that's why I have insurance. They're going to do all that. Insurance doesn't cover everything like what you're going to go through, and I call it the total calamity cost. There's no money that's going to work you through all of that stress, all of the problems that you have to go through to get back to business. So having a plan really goes a long way.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's hard to say, what you'll be dealt when you face one of these perils, but I think that's good working through all the possible scenarios that could happen and just at least having an idea of how you're going to handle it rather than waiting on that event to happen and say, okay, what do I do now? Because that seems very overwhelming with so many different decisions you have to make.
It is,
yeah. Yeah. What about documenting your inventory and equipment and knowing what you have?
Yeah, so you want to document your inventory, take photos, take videos, make a spreadsheet. Whatever's easiest at first. The longer you work on it, the better. But this is going to help you with an insurance claim. This is going to help you get back to business. If you know the manufacturer, the model numbers of certain type of equipment, let's say you have a very specialized type of occupancy. Knowing what you have before an event, is going to help you recover much quickly. You want to stay close with your insurance company. You want to be in contact with them immediately after a storm or a loss. And having that information, that documentation is going to help you, is going to help your insurance company fulfill your needs when you really need it.
All right. Well, definitely an interesting conversation. Anything else that business owners just need to be aware of, or anything that I didn't bring up that you wanted to mention before we go today?
Well, I'm going to go back to when I was a field person. And when I was a field guy, basically I had two premises. And what I had seen was people used to say, it won't happen to me. And the other thing was, it won't be that bad. Well, unfortunately, we are seeing it can happen to everybody. And it will at some point, unfortunately. And it can be that bad. So when it comes to hurricanes, I always tell them, prepare for at least one category stronger. Maybe prepare for two now, the way we see this rapid intensification. We saw this with Milton. I mean, it went from, a tropical depression to a Cat 5 really quickly. And, the whole Florida coast was worried. And it was bad for a lot of people. A lot of people experienced devastation along the coast. And it can be bad, and it can happen to you.
Yeah. We've seen a lot of that this year. I mean, entire Main Street businesses wiped out in parts of North Carolina due to Helene. So, yeah, there's just absolutely nowhere that is safe anymore. And we're seeing these more intense disasters, and just I feel like we're at the point where anything could happen anytime. It's just, it was unbelievable to see that devastation. And I think a lot of business owners in the Carolinas certainly did not see that coming. I think none of us really could have up until right before that storm.
Exactly.
Okay, well, where can people go? Where can business owners go, owners of commercial buildings? Where can they go to find more resources from IBHS?
So we have a lot of great resources publicly available, IBHS.org. You can find all kinds of information there. We have ready guides for winter weather, wildfire, and wind. We have our programs. We have OFB EZ and Easy Prep. Plenty of resources that we just encourage everyone to use. That's why it's there. That's why we do it. We're here to help. And there's lots of stuff. They can contact us anytime with any kind of question they may have.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
Good to have you here in person. I know you're based out of our Tampa office, so Good to have you here in our studio today, our temporary studio. And for now, we will wrap up this episode of Disaster Discussions. We'll see you back here next month for another episode. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks for listening to the Disaster Discussions podcast, an IBHS production. Subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast app or watch the podcast on our website at ibhs.org/disaster discussions podcast and on the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety's YouTube channel. Connect with us on our social media pages. And for more great content from IBHS, including ongoing research efforts happening at our facility and more, visit ibhs.org.